Namaskar. Today we will be discussing the next topic in Salesforce management, which is compensation. So this is lecture 28, which is the third lecture in the sixth module of our course on sales and distribution management. Compensation is something which is always and always a very important criteria by which people join companies, and also something by which companies are able to retain their salespeople. Not only retain, companies attract a lot of sales force, a lot of employees on the basis of the compensation packages that they offer, and they often retain them on by paying salaries and providing incentives which are something very, very attractive, so that they can retain the sales force. They can also motivate the salespeople and the sales force in their organization. So compensation is something which is a very, very crucial decision which companies must take when they must attract and motivate and retain their employees in any of the departments. And in the sales function, it becomes even more important that a very sound compensation policy is adopted, and very sound compensation packages are designed so that companies can attract efficient sales people, sales force, and they can they would be able to motivate them better, they would be able to retain them better, and the organization would overall benefit from the performance of the motivated sales force. So under this particular topic, we shall be discussing first what is compensation, the meaning of compensation, then strategic policy decisions with respect to compensation, the motivating role of compensation, the requirements of a good compensation plan, devising a good compensation plan, and types of compensation plans. So let us discuss first with what do we mean by compensation. Now compensation is what employees in an organization receive for the services that they provide to a company, and it's a very, very important source of motivation to an extent. The question which is often asked is money an important motivating factor? Well, money has a limited motivating power as a motivating factor, yet it is perceived to be something as very, very important, and it is perceived as something very crucial when people apply for jobs in an organization, or get attracted towards joining an organization, and not only joining, even when it is to continue working for an organization, the compensation is an important factor that every employee keeps in mind. So attracting talent, retaining talent is something which every organization wants, and as I just said, compensation is a very, very vital tool to attract and retain talent in the company, attract and retain efficient and effective salespeople in the company, sales executives in the company. Money is also a very, very important motivating factor, because it helps employees build their career and ensures their relationship with the organization. People would be motivated not only to work hard and perform well, but also motivated to remain a part of the company. They would want to remain a part of the organization for which they are working. Now what are the objectives of a sales compensation plan? Of course, the first objective, as I said, is to attract and retain salespeople, and the more important objective here becomes motivating them towards higher productivity levels, controlling their activities and their performance, so as to be able to derive sales and profits for the organization. So if we ask if is money an important motivating factor, the truth is that money has a limited motivation power as a motivating factor, but yet it is perceived as something which is very, very, very crucial, which very crucial for not only for an organization but for people who join the organization. Because when companies design compensation packages, they must also keep in mind the sales that are generated, the revenues, the profits, So companies must be able to afford lucrative packages and compensation packages for their sales force, and that would again depend upon the performance of the sales force in the field. So it becomes more of a vicious circle. Companies would be able to pay only and only when people are performing well, and to encourage people to perform well, again, money is something which attracts people to work harder, because they feel that if they work harder they would get higher commissions and higher incentives. The very objective of designing a very good compensation plan for an organization is to attract and retain sales force, motivate them, control them, and improve productivity levels. So what does compensation include? Compensation basically includes components like the salary, the wages, the bonuses, etc., and can be fixed or variable. Now we will be discussing the fixed and variable parts or components or elements of a salary structure a little later, and we should also be speaking about profit sharing and bonus and fringe benefits as we move along. But when we talk about compensation, it includes both direct and indirect compensation. Direct compensation including the salaries, the incentives, the commissions, the bonuses, and indirect compensation which comes in the form of fringe benefits. So if we actually break up a salary package of a person, what we get is a salary, then we get incentives, which are basically payment by results. It is something which is paid in addition to salaries, and again incentives are something which may be either individual based to keep an individual salesperson motivated, to make him feel rewarded. It could also be group based to make the entire sales team rewarded and to keep them motivated at their workplaces. Apart from that, we have fringe benefits, which are employee benefits like social security schemes, sometimes which are statutory and regulated by law. Sometimes it is something which companies opt for out of their own will. And so you have a provident fund, you have gratuity, you have medical care, you have recreational facilities, club membership facilities, etc., which have become a part of fringe benefits. You also have something which are perks or perquisites. Perquisites could include paid vacations, company cars, again club memberships, furnished accommodation. Now in some cases the club memberships or furnished accommodation or paid vacations becomes again a part of the fringe benefit. In some cases it is they are put into two different heads. One is a fringe benefit, the other is a perquisite or a perk. And then you have non-monetary benefits, which could be promotion, recognition, opportunities for growth and advancement. So you have these different elements or components in a salary, in a salary package or in a compensation package, which starts with salary, which is more of a fixed element, and then you have the variable elements in the form of incentives. Further, you have fringe benefits, perquisites, and non-monetary benefits. We shall be discussing about some of these elements a little later. Now, there are certain strategic policy decisions which need to be made when companies decide on the compensation packages. First is the pay level policy. Now, the pay level policy here refers to the organization's pay level compared to those of its competitors. So it refers to how an organization's pay level compares to those of its competitors. This has an impact on the organization's ability to attract salespeople, or it also has an ability to retain competent salespeople, and companies here have an option to either match with the competitor or lead ahead of the competitor and pay more, or lag behind the competitor and pay less. The second important thing which we discuss here is the salary or the pay structure policy. Now the pay structure policy refers to the pay ranges. The minimum or the maximum in the range are based on the relative worth of the job. So here comes in the importance of job evaluation, which basically determines the relevant worth of jobs in comparison to other jobs in the organization. We shall be speaking about job evaluation a little later, but here when we talk about job evaluation, it's important to mention that pay must be related to the relative worth of a job. A job which is extremely important and crucial for an organization necessarily means that the person who is placed on the job must be paid more, or either in the form of salary or in the form of incentives or in the form of fringe benefits and perks. The second thing which we speak of in the pay structure policy is the internal and external equity. Now, internal equity here means that similar jobs in an organization are paid similarly, and the more demanding job positions and the better qualified people for those jobs are paid higher than the others. So similar jobs get similar pay, and the more demanding job positions and better qualified people are paid higher than the others. This is within the organization. External equity is when jobs are fairly compensated in comparison with similar jobs in the industry. So it's very important that people feel that they are being equitably paid, whether it is within the organization or outside the organization. And here, if you recall, it is Stacey Adams' equity theory is something which is very applicable and relevant here, that each and every person desires equity and fairness in the kind of compensation or in the kind of salaries that they receive. The third thing which we discuss here is the types of rewards offered, which could be extrinsic and intrinsic. We go back to Herzberg's theory, and where he spoke about certain elements in which are intrinsic to the job, and certain elements which are extrinsic to the job, which can motivate. That is one part. But apart from that, what we here specifically speak of is the whether we are talking of the monetary and the non-monetary reward. So the pay, for example, becomes, or say salary, for example, incentives, bonuses, they are all monetary rewards and they are extrinsic to the job. But when it comes to non-monetary benefits, it could be the advancement, recognition, career development facilities, opportunities for growth and development, which become more of the intrinsic reward, which can act as strong motivators for an employee. So going ahead again and again, we come to the question about, is money a motivator? And we said yes, it has a limited motivation power. And why and how? Because a good well-designed compensation plan plays three important motivational roles. One, it offers living wages to its employees, so employees are assured of a salary coming to them every month, especially if it is a fixed component, and employees are paid on a monthly basis, or on a generally we speak of as in terms of the sales role, it's going to be more of a monthly basis. So it offers living wages to the employees. Of course, for certain kinds of jobs where people are paid middle of the month, or they are paid every 15 days, in those cases, of course, even there money becomes important, because it assures the employee or the worker that yes, he is going to be paid every 15 days or every month, and so it offers to him living wages. When pay scales get adjusted to performance, or we would refer to this as payment by results, they encourage employees towards higher performance and productivity. So what we are talking of here is more of a variable component, which comes as a part of incentives and commissions, and gain sharing, profit sharing as bonuses. Also, money acts as a means for achieving the congruency between individual goals and company goals. We all know that the company strives for attaining sales, profits, revenues, market shares, and individuals also need salaries for their bare sustenance, for their day-to-day expenses. So the reward system has to be such designed that the individual goals can be met, and the company goals also go hand in glove, and they both, as and when individual goals are being met, company goals are being met as well, and vice versa. So again, here, if you remember, we can relate this to Room's expectancy theory, where it's important that the reward system or the compensation package is designed in such a manner that it is lucrative, it is attractive, it is something which is of value to the person who is going to be placed on a particular job position at a particular salary structure. So what are the requirements of a good compensation plan? So it should take into account both company as well as salesperson's interests. I just said that the company interests lie in revenues, profits, and it's very important that companies assure that people assure such compensation plans, and they design such compensation plans, they assure their workforce with such compensation plans which can be perceived as equitable. So issues of internal and external equity become important. With reference to salesperson's interests, salespersons are always would be keen on both a regular income as well as an incentive income. So a salesperson's interests lie in a steady flow of income every month as a fixed component, something which is very regularly paid monthly basis, and an incentive income which is something which is paid on the based on their productivity and performance levels. So what we are speaking of is a fixed salary plus incentive for good performance, and the salesperson must feel that he has a secure income that would help him meet his living expenses. It should also motivate employees who are high performers as compared to employees who are not meeting their targets. So here, when we are talking about salesperson's interest and the incentive, it's important that he feels that yes, because he is doing good work, he has to be rewarded and he must be rewarded, and the company is rewarding him with commissions, bonuses, incentives, etc., which is being paid to him and not to others, because the others are not performing well. Of course, the bonus is something which is generally paid to everybody in the organization if the organization earns profits, but components like incentives and commissions are something which should be paid to high performers, and it would motivate employees who are on high earned performance as compared to employees not meeting their targets. So this is again, so here what we are talking of is that the plan should take care of both the salesperson's interest as well as the company's interest, interest in terms of sales and profits, and then a company has to take into account that it can assure perceived internal and external equity for the sales force. And the salesperson's interest here lies in both a regular flow of income as well as a variable component in the form of incentives and commissions, which will keep him motivated, and will feel that yes, because he's a high performer, he is paid more as compared to employees who are not meeting their targets. Also, good compensation plan must be something which helps attain objectives of the organization. As I said, it should address issues of fair and equitable salaries. It should be linked to the salesperson's efforts and performance. It should be fair, practical. It should not be built on unrealistic expectations. Based on the nature of the job and the knowledge, skills and abilities required, as well as the industry standards, the compensation package must be designed. So it should be based on factors like the nature of the sales job, the knowledge, skills and abilities required, as well as the industry standards. So industry standards would again here imply the perceived external equity for the salesperson. Also, the compensation plan should be such which is simple to understand and very, very easy to implement. Now, how do you go about devising a good compensation plan? We have these various steps which we will be discussing. So we start with how do you first define the sales job, study the company's general compensation structure, study the compensation patterns in the community and the industry, determine the compensation level, provide for the compensation mix and the elements, and make provisions keeping in mind the unusual needs and problems faced by the company, consult the existing sales force, prepare the tentative plan, pre-test it, revise the plan if required, and implement the plan and follow up. So these are the various stages which would help develop a good compensation plan. Let us discuss these stages one by one. The first important thing here is to define the sales job. So, here when we define the sales job, what we are typically speaking of is the job description. A well-written job description serves as an effective means for defining jobs, provided that they offer a realistic view of what the salesperson is supposed to be doing. Separate job descriptions must be prepared for different sales jobs and positions, and in case there are no sales descriptions, the first thing that the company must do is to prepare a job description. As no two job roles are alike, they will call for different pay structures, and it is essential that a job description is done, and it may also have to be followed by a job evaluation when it would come to determining the relevant worth of a job, so that the pay structures can be decided accordingly. This is because no two sales jobs are alike, so they would have to this would mean different pay structures, and different pay structures again would mean an exercise on job description and job evaluation. The second is study the company's general compensation structure. Now, we all know that people in the sales force or in the marketing and sales team are paid differently than what other people in the organization are paid. Now, while the fixed component may not vary that much, what varies is in terms of the incentives, the commissions, the perks, and the other kind of fringe benefits that the sales team enjoys. So the broad compensation structure being offered to all the employees in the organization, irrespective of departments across the organization, has to be kept in mind. Else the people in other departments may feel antagonized. Yet provisions have to be made for the marketing and sales team. And so first what we start with is the company's general compensation structure, and then we move on to make special provisions for the marketing and sales force. So the job evaluation system here helps in determining the relative worth of the job in comparison to other jobs. They would help determine the pay level and the pay structures, and there are 4 different kinds of methods which may be used for job evaluation: simple ranking, classification or grading, point system, and the factor comparison method. So we first have the simple ranking, where jobs are sorted in terms of their worth, and it is usually done by a few HR people, and salespersons are generally not involved in the process at all. The method is inexpensive. It is something which would be done quicker and with lesser costs, but it is not much reliable. The second method which can be followed for job evaluation is grading, where jobs are classified across various groups with respect to the responsibilities that one would have to take, the skills required, the supervision required, etc. And so the sales executive here would classify these jobs across various grades, and this information would be later used by the company for determining the pay structure. The third is a point system, one of the most extensively used methods for job evaluation. The various elements in a job are defined in terms of the physical skills required, the mental skills required, the abilities, the educational requirements, personality trait requirements, etc., and as well as the responsibility, supervision. And all these factors are assigned minimum or maximum points, and the relative importance of these factors is determined, which are then allotted to various compensation levels. So the various elements are graded, and points are given to them, and the relative worth of a job is determined. And then we have the factor comparison method, where it is like a point system, but it is more complex. A cross comparison approach is used, and the jobs in this case are evaluated factor by factor, and these are arranged in ranks from the lowest to the highest. So these are 4 different methods which may be used to assess the relative importance of the job, or the relative worth of the job, or what we refer to as job evaluation. Thereafter, companies must study the compensation pattern in the industry. Now, the compensation for salesperson is never decided in isolation. It is always affected by the supply and demand of trained manpower, or the kind of manpower which would fit into the job role in the industry. So the compensation level is affected by the supply and demand of trained manpower, or a manpower with necessary KSAs to fill those job requirements in the industry. The supply and demand here would determine whether you need to pay more, or you can be something you can manage with paying just in the at the average levels. So the management of the company must analyze as to the kind of compensation systems that prevail in the industry, and the average compensation for similar jobs being offered by other companies in the industry, and they must then take another decision to match, to lead, or to lag. And of course, they must also take into account the advantages and disadvantages of each of them, whether you match with the competitors in the industry, or you lead and pay more than other companies in the industry, or you lag and pay less than other people in the industry. So you have to basically see whether you will match, or you will lead, or you will lag. Now, in case there is an inequity in the pay scale offered by the competitors, there would be a higher probability of attrition by the sales force, who would then leave your organization and go and join the competitors' organization, especially if the competitor is paying more. So it's very, very essential that the compensation pattern in the industry is analyzed, one, to assess the demand and supply of manpower in the industry, and accordingly determine whether you must pay more to attract the scarce manpower, the scarce trained manpower, or the scarce manpower with the KSAs, required KSAs, or you need to be, you can afford to pay the average what is being paid. And of course, then you must also keep in mind about and decide on whether what the competitors in the industry are paying, and whether you would want to match with them, or lead and pay more, or lag and pay less. Now, thereafter you determine the compensation level. The management must decide on the amount of compensation a salesperson will receive, keeping in mind both the internal and external equity, as well as the knowledge, skills and abilities that a salesperson must possess. Several times there is always a bargaining or a negotiation that takes place between companies and the prospective employees. But it is to be noted here that in case of inequity, salespeople may get demotivated, and especially if they hold similar KSAs and have the same job and responsibilities but are being paid less. So issues of internal and external equity need to be taken care of, and management must always ensure that no employees are overcompensated or undercompensated. If they are overcompensated, it would mean increase in the cost for the company, and if they are undercompensated, it is again not good in for the company in the long run, because the attrition rate will be very, very high, and people will sooner or later leave the organization for greener pastures. Thereafter, the company has to decide on the compensational elements. There are four basic elements that make up a compensation plan. The fixed component, which provides some stability of income every month, which is a salary. The variable component, which serves as an incentive, which could be a commission or a bonus, or another component which is related to fringe benefits, and a component which is related to reimbursement of expenses. So companies have to select a combination of these components when they design their compensation package or the compensation structure. Of course, companies also have to keep in mind the unusual needs and problems of the company, and accordingly they must adjust, the pay structures. For example, one commonly faced problems by organizations is the salespersons may overemphasize upon selling small ticket items and may ignore the big ticket ones. Now, the small ticket items are easier to sell because they are inexpensive compared to the big ticket items, but small ticket items also are low margin products, which would mean that high margin products may get neglected, and this may be this may be something which the competitor companies can take advantage of. So this is one problem which companies often face. Another problem which companies face is that salespeople prefer earning small orders. Now, the small orders, in case of several small orders by several salespeople, this would mean that the transaction costs increase and are very, very high. So this is something which again is a problem, that instead of seeking higher orders or large orders, they earn small orders. Now, why difference in high and small orders is because small orders are easier to obtain as compared to large orders or higher orders, but the transaction cost associated with small orders is something which is very, very high as compared to high orders or large orders. Another problem which salespersons which companies face is that the salespersons want to concentrate only on selling activities, and they want to avoid non-selling functions, or non-selling activities, because the selling activities lead to commissions and incentives, and non-selling activities may not give them that opportunity. So they would want to avoid non-selling activities like follow-up calls on dealers and customers, or promotional activities, etc., as they are not linked to the compensation plan. So the compensation plan must be designed in such a manner so as to account for such problems and to encourage selling of better balanced orders. High commission rates may be paid for big ticket items and those that have been neglected, and for those who obtain larger orders, more points may be given. higher commissions may be given. Points may be allotted for non-selling activities, again to encourage people to concentrate on both selling and non-selling activities, and these points may be later converted into financial and non-financial incentives. So these are things which the people, which the sales executives and the HR team must take into account while they are designing a compensation package for a sales executive and for the sales team. Thereafter, companies consult the existing sales force, they discuss the plan with them, seek suggestions with respect to changes that should be brought about in the compensation plan. They prepare the tentative plan, they pre-test it and they revise it in case there are problems of implementation. Now, a draft compensation plan must be prepared and pre-tested on a small sample so as to cover very small set of territories, each representing distinct selling situations and challenges, and such a pre-test would help identify weaknesses in the plan and potential problem areas, and the plan must then be revised so that the weaknesses and the deficiencies can be minimized, and then the company would implement the plan and follow up with it. Now, before we close, we will discuss quickly the types of compensation plans. We have 3 different types of compensation plans. One is a straight salary plan, which is the simplest of all, where the salesperson receives a fixed amount of money at regular intervals, and the entire salary is a fixed component. It is not at all performance linked. So, the method is suitable for sales trainees who are new to the job and have not yet started performing well or giving good returns to the company. So, in this case, a fixed salary goes to them every month. Of course, as and when they grow, they begin to perform and they begin to earn some experience. Of course, at that time companies must revise and and they must also think of other incentives. But here in this particular case, where the sales trainees have to be paid, the simplest compensation plan, which is the straight salary plan, is something which is very, very suitable. Advantages are the method is easy to use, understand, implement, and it provides a secured income to the sales force, and there is freedom from any kind of financial uncertainties. But the disadvantages are that people may prefer to be average performers than being higher on productivity. They have no motivation. They would have no motivation to work harder, to earn more, so that they can earn incentives. So the method fails to reward outstanding performers or penalize people who are low on performance. So high performance may sooner or later lose interest. High performers may lose interest, and they may lose enthusiasm and motivation. The second is a straight commission plan, which is based entirely on productivity and performance. So the productivity of a salesperson is the only parameter which will determine his salary, and the determinant here is sales volume or profitability, and the commission rate will be a percentage of the sales or the gross profit, and the commission rates would vary with sales volume levels, which are determined by the company, and these will again vary across products. So commission systems become very complex when there are differential commission rates for different kinds of products, or for different customers, or for different territories, or for different kinds of selling situations. And the advantages of the method is that it leads to huge amount of motivation among salespeople, and this would result in sales and profits. But the disadvantage is that people may ignore non-selling activities, because non-selling activities generally do not get linked to incentives and to commissions. Now, there are 2 formats here: a straight commission with salespeople managing their own selling expenses, and a straight commission with the company paying the selling expenses. Then we have the combination of salary and incentive plan, which combines both, and there are 4 formats here, which is the salary plus commission, salary plus bonus, salary plus commission plus bonus, and commission plus bonus. Now, bonus here is something which is given to employees as a group, as employees in the organization, when they do something more than what has been desired from them. So this particular method helps management to blend control and motivation, as different plans are designed for different job positions. A fixed amount is paid, and the salespeople also get a chance to earn commissions by selling more. So advantages are that it blends together the advantages of both the salary and the incentive plan, and it assures financial security to the people. It also gives them an opportunity to earn commissions, and which they can supplement their income with. Disadvantages are that the method is highly complex and difficult. It may be difficult to understand and execute. Clerical costs also increase because a lot of records have to be maintained. Finally, we have the bonuses and the fringe benefits. The bonus here depicts an amount which is paid for completing a specific sales task, an additional financial reward which is paid by the company to its employees for achieving or effectively performing tasks like reaching sales targets, earning new customers, carrying out non-selling activities, etc., and such that there is an overall benefit for the organization. And fringe benefits are benefits which companies use to attract and retain sales force, which may be statutory and law bound, or they may be non-statutory, and these would include social security measures, paid holidays, club membership, medical insurance, children's education, etc. Of course, there is no direct relationship between the fringe benefits and job performance. So, with this we come to an end of this session. These are the references, and so we conclude with the third lecture on the 6th module of the course. Thank you.